Hello, this is David Giese, the CEO and co-founder of Analytics. So today I'm going to be presenting a short 5-minute video where I'm talking through an example bug that we ran into on our MedTech OS software and a few techniques that we applied to solve it. I think the most interesting thing will be the techniques, which can be applied generally, although the specific example hopefully will give you some context. So a little background first. So as part of our MedTech OS software, which we use to produce regulatory documentation and handle quality for our medical device software, we have a feature where in this case, we're trying to go from HTML that's generated within Notion into Markdown. And we actually used Pandoc as part of that process. And we were running into an issue where Pandoc kept producing, we were going from this HTML into Markdown, but it kept producing HTML in the final output. And that was a problem because then from the Markdown, we go to Word, and Word doesn't support raw HTML, unlike Markdown. And so we kept wondering what was the problem that was causing Pandoc to spit out raw HTML. So at first, when we were debugging this, we were iterating from using our software. So we would export using Notion's API. We'd go from the Notion page, and then we'd pull down all the content. And that's a very slow process. So one of the first things we did was we reproduced the issue from the command line, running Pandoc locally. And so we go from HTML to Markdown with some extensions disabled, and then so on. And so we can run this, and you can see here when we run it, it produces all this gibberish because we've got the Jinja. Then what we did was we progressively simplified us down from removed out the Jinja. We still had the problem. Then we removed the anchor tags, still had the problem. Then we removed all the text, still had the problem. And finally, it was once we realized once we went from 10 columns in the table to 9, that was the trigger. And so we can see here, so if we go, so in this example where we have the 10 columns, we have it, but then when we reduce down, we get the nice Markdown table like we wanted. Then from there, we went into the source code, and I don't know Haskell especially well, but we were able to navigate down to the HTML or the Markdown writer file. And after a little bit of digging, we realized there was an option that seemed to be dictating this behavior. And sure enough, when we went into the Pandoc user guide, we saw that there is a comment, this columns property, which we weren't aware of, that affects the calculations for column widths. And so it seems like what was happening was Pandoc, if you had a certain number of columns, you'd hit this 72 character width, and then it would say, hey, if I use HTML, I'll be able to squeeze it into the 72 characters, whereas if I use Markdown, I won't. And so then it switched over, and that was the issue. So when we then set the columns to we set the columns properly, it worked. So what can we learn here more generally? So there's a few things. First, it's very important to reduce the dev loop for trying out things. And there's all sorts of tricks you can use for your situation to do that, but that's usually good investment. Like, it feels like you're going off on a tangent doing that when you're trying to fix a bug, and we all have deadlines, but often that's a worthwhile thing to invest in. The next thing is, the strategy of creating the smallest reproducible example is important because it reduces red herrings. It lets you identify, hey, was the number of columns. And even at that point, it was specific enough that we were able to go into the source code and actually get some hints and see what was causing it. Without that, there's so many things. It could have been like, is it something wrong with the Jinja? Is it, some special Unicode character? Like, we don't know. But getting that smallest reproducible example helps you focus down really well. Then, of course, reading the code is great. And then finally, and obviously, if we could have passed all this if we'd known about the columns property and we'd read the documentation carefully. So another thing is to not get stuck on red herrings like we were stuck on a few on the way. But anyway, I hope this short video is helpful, and some of these debugging techniques maybe will help save you time on some problem you have. Thank you.